Good morning and welcome to this episode of your Tech Care podcast. You are joining me, Sangha, and my brilliant co-host, Martin. Today we have with us John, Sophie, and Lee, and we are going to have a full house talking about technology and care from multiple directions. So, welcome.
It's quite fantastic, John, that when you and I started a conversation about this podcast and the work that you do, that you immediately said to me, I know how we should do this. We should invite people that either we support or someone who is a family member of someone we support, and then someone from my team to come and tell you what it's really like. And I said immediately, yes, this is exactly what you're missing. And I'm a bit embarrassed we haven't done this before, Sangha. So Lee, Sophie, John, welcome. I'm going to hand over to you to begin with, John, because I want to really understand where you're from, and then perhaps you can hand over.
Thank you, Morton. So obviously, as you know, I run a small care agency in Devon called Unicare Devon. We started our company in 2009, and from the outset, really wanted to embrace digital, just because we feel it helps in every single way. And when I hear people saying, I can't afford it, in my mind, you can't afford not to, from the savings it makes you from day one. And what's really interesting is there's perception that people won't want to use it, they won't want to have it, and it can cause problems. But in the real terms, it just streamlines things so much. And yes, it's not perfect, but often it really does help. And certainly, next to me, I've got Sophie, and Sophie's been one of our fantastic carers and now has moved in to do risk assessments and care plans for us. And Sophie's gone the whole hog, really, from using it as a carer, as an app, signed in, signed out, looking at tasks, reporting risk assessments and skin integrity reports and things like that, through to using it to write digital care plans and all the things that, the local government now want everyone to embrace. But what's really interesting is we've got Lee on the call, and Lee, we looked after a family member for him. And I asked him to come along today because Lee had a moment when we first started looking after this person, where actually for a week or two, he didn't have any of our software, and we were having to sort of phone him and say, mum's okay or such and such. But then we gave him the software. And Lee, from your point of view, how did that change for you?
So, obviously it's really hard when a loved one, receives care, and what you're desperate for, I guess, is a little window into that and to be able to see and understand what's happening every day, that someone's actually turned up, how things were from an objective perspective, So for me, it gave me a little look at my parents. So, my mum and how she was physically on that day, but also how things were with my dad. So it kind of gave me a whole little story really about, the episode of care. And I suppose that was reassuring because obviously I could see patterns, I could see what was happening each day. So, once I started to get these little glimmers into that moment, I started to be able to see things from someone else's eyes. And that was really, really helpful. I suppose it's reassuring. It was reassuring that people had gone in and the observations they'd recorded. So it was very clear around, I could put myself in the position of when they went through the door, who they spoke to, what they saw, and everything else. And I think, I wouldn't have had that if I'd just had a paper record which said washed and dressed or whatever it was. It was a real insight into what was going on, which, as I say, was very reassuring.
Yeah, it certainly sounds so. And just to make everybody who's not had that experience know what we're talking about, what pragmatically did you actually do? Did you download an app, or tell us about it?
Yeah, so it was a case of downloading an app on my phone, which was, in the modern age, of course, everything's on an app on the phone, and being given access. So the Unicare were able to give me access to the system, so I was able to then look at my mum's record, which obviously she consented to as well. So there's no issue around confidentiality. If there had been, of course, that would have been picked up. But actually, I was very involved in my mum's care generally. So it was just another part of that puzzle. But having the app meant I carried on going to work. I could carry on doing all the things I had to do, and I could look that day to see what had happened that morning. And that was really, really helpful for me. And I think it's clearly the way forward for a lot of things in health and social care, where people are more and more wanting to be engaged and have information, and it was really accessible and it worked really well.
I think for you, Lee, I mean, because you were really involved in your mum's care, care is never straightforward. We don't live in a very black and white world. There's always grey areas everywhere, and times change and durations change in your mum's day. And the nice thing about it, I mean, there's plenty of times when obviously you would have been popping in to see mum, and you would have been able to see if our call had changed by 20 minutes, and you'd know that instantly. So that did enable you to really be more involved, didn't it? Having that access really quickly in live data streams straight to you.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting bit was, I suppose, as well, was the reference to the environment that they lived in. So I was able to quickly know that my dad was okay as well, because it was always walked in the door, said hello to my mum, and then there was always a reference around saying hello to my dad. And if I knew that they were both okay, then that kind of meant that I could get on and actually then I could plan what I was going to do to catch up with them later in the day. So, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine having the same environment now without, if I didn't have that care record, because it was really useful for me programming in my life around supporting my parents at that time. And it gave me a heads up if I needed to know and to ring them or anything else. If there were things that I read, I thought, well, that doesn't sound quite right, then I would have followed it up, of course. That was the insight it gave you, which, as I've said, is it's not, I suppose it's not just reassuring, it's also enabling, isn't it? Because it enabled me as a family member to be part of that journey, that part of the care that I wouldn't have been part of had I not had access to that system.
That's really cool to hear. And John, I think we need to hear from you, because 2009, you said you must have been.
In 2009, we started off Unicare, and like lots of small agencies, you start with very little. My story is no different to lots of people, where I had very little money, 2 young children, and I had to buy my policies in my spare room and get to learn everything about the CQC and stuff like that. But what was really key was managing the sheer amount of technical data you have to do as a manager and an owner via paper. I mean, I've got quite severe dyslexia, so the thought of it is not possible, really. So I have to find ways to fix it. So I was never an Excel man. I was never a sort of Word man. I was like, let's just get some software that does this. But then it led me into a bit of a journey, really, where I'm sort of saying, well, if we can do this, let's get rid of the folders. Let's start building apps. Like I said previously to you, there's a gentleman from Ulysses who we're working with. He would go to the States, get the latest technology, come back, and we sit down and theorize what should be in these apps. And we started building them ourselves. And gradually but surely, the world's caught up with us and they're overtaking us, and I don't get involved in that anymore because it's far too technical. But I think that the key here is, through technology, it gives you the opportunity to work more efficiently and gives you more time back to do the things that are important to the clients. If I'm spending all my life writing risk assessments or doing audits, I can't do the care. And that's what's important here. The end user's outcome is more important to me than paperwork. And if you can facilitate that to come out in a better way, you have to use software to do that. And certainly when we then think about the carers have an incredibly precious job. And we often talk about carers and saying, well, they need more money, they need better terms. To me, I think they need a way to stop time anxiety, because they're so precious. They've got to get from one call to the next call to the next call. Something runs over, they can't find their medication, can't do this. And actually, through this technology, you can give them all that data really, really quickly. But actually, it might be through platforms like Slack, it might be through any sort of different platform, but you can interact with them really, really quickly and enable them to move on to the next call and reduce that pressure and the internal anxiety they feel. So this is a win-win all the way around. I mean, Sophie, how did it feel for you as a carer using these apps? Because you've got a bit of both sides of it, good and bad, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think with all technology, there are going to be times where it fails. And that can be incredibly stressful if you're out on the road and you're going to a new client and all of a sudden the app stops syncing and you can't access the link to get sat nav to go to the client's house. I mean, I've been very lucky in that any problems I've had have been quickly resolved. And I think in general, having all the information you need available so quickly, so before I went to see a new client, I'd get my phone out, go on the app, read through their care plan, read through their risk assessments, read through the tasks. So before I even walked through the door, I had an idea of what I was going into. And I think if you can also read through previous carer notes. So I'd spend the time thinking, right, this is what they've done this morning, this is what they've done at lunchtime. Whereas I think if the carers were writing down in a communication book for their visit notes, I would be able to access those notes before going into the visit.
No.
And I think that massively helps. And I'll be honest, I used to get anxiety going into new clients. I think everybody does a little bit, but being reassured that I can know a lot of information before going in massively helped. And I think now as well, being on the other side, so I put the client tasks on now, and I've jiggled things about just so I know, reading it myself, the key information I can put on in a really easy way to read. So say, for instance, if the carer unfortunately had to call the GP surgery or 999, they would have all the information they need just in one place that they can easily access.
Yeah, that makes great sense, and it sounds like you've had experiences with technology where you were feeling that there was certainly an enabler to the work that you were doing, but also to maybe it's a bit too much, but I'm also hearing that you could feel more confident in your work and perhaps a bit more self-reliant even.
Yeah, and I think as well, we use skin integrity forms a lot, and I speak to the district nurses and the GP surgeries daily, and they find the forms so useful because the carers have it on their app, so they go into the form. If the client has a skin concern, they will fill the form out, and with the client's consent, they'll take a photograph. That comes through to the office, and then we can send it directly either to the district nurse or the GP. And I would say 80% of the time, that then means that they don't need to see the client. So they're able to say, yeah, I've seen the photo, I can diagnose what it is, I've prescribed a cream, keep us updated. And I think that just saves so much time for them as well. And it's just a lot more efficient for us.
Yeah, and I guess what it does ultimately, because in there's somewhat of a discussion or an inherent debate whether or not a visit is needed or if it's wanted. And I think where we are today, we talk a lot about, but if I don't get a visit, perhaps I am also not socially very stimulated then. But if it was me personally, I'd live on my own. I'd prefer nobody come in my door every day. So I get what you're saying. And it's also perhaps about then prioritizing the visits. What are they about then? Can they be about something else than the most dire important things? Can they be about you and I having a conversation, or because other things are then more efficient? What do you think, Lee?
I think it definitely. So the other thing I was going to say is that my mum used to then ask me to tell her about what the carers had written. So it kind of helped with a bit of a dialogue, because I could then get into a conversation. Look, so and so came this morning. They said this, this, and this, and she'd go, "Oh, yes, that's true." And so I think there was something about it became a bit of a talking point. I don't know whether it kind of opened up. I think she built quite a good rapport with some of the carers, actually, and I think, whether that was because of the app or not, I don't know, but I do know she enjoyed talking back through so and so came, and then I'd look on the thing and we'd compare sort of notes as to what had happened, and that was stimulating in the sense of it helped me in a conversation, because otherwise I wouldn't have known what to have said about the care visits. And my mum certainly was good at reflecting and, look, they mentioned your dad, kind of thing, and yes, he was there doing that. So yeah, it did bring to life, I think, some of the visits. I think from it's all about living life, isn't it? And at that stage, my mum's life was very much around the carers, who was coming, what they said, what they'd done, how she was, and this was an enabler in that conversation for me as an important family member, I guess.
Yeah, to be able to take part in that conversation, which you'd most likely not be able to had you not had such an access, then it brings you on par with what's important to your mum at that time. John, you have to then tell us the secret about how you discovered the app that Lee also used then.
There's many apps out there, isn't there? And one of the things that's really key around buying software is making sure as a company you're ready. Are you ready to accept digital? And what does that mean? Because as a direct, one of the things I did really on was, I want this for myself. This is what I want. But as I've grown as a person and grown as a company, now when I'm looking at software, I'm saying, okay, staff, what does it mean to you? What's important to you? When I'm buying this, what do you want back out of this? And then when I speak to people like Lee, I'm buying this new software. What's important to you? What sort of features would you like? And getting that whole rounded approach to, what does this mean if we buy this, to everybody? And if you can get that input, it means you're going to have a much better acceptance of the product once you do it. So yes, audits are great. Yes, scheduling's important, but it's just important for the end users what they think. So you must hold that tight, especially because ultimately it's around their care. So there's something in planning well ahead, making sure you've got a really good way to implement it. And don't be afraid to ask questions. You can't keep everyone happy, but actually the more questions you ask the people, the better it'll be ultimately. And what's really great about it, and Lee will be able to tell you, I'm sure, that these bits of software are really easy to get up and running and get used to. I mean, Lee will tell you himself, we phoned him up, downloaded the app, goodness, John, I don't know what we're going to do. In about a day, he's then telling me, I can see everything, John, it's amazing. Lee, how was it for you learning how to use it? Was it tricky?
I would say, to start with, the first day, I was intimidated by the whole idea of it and having an app on my phone and, having access to my mum's information and all the rest of it. But once I was talked through it, it was easy. And, that was the beauty, wasn't it? That, there it was on my phone. I didn't have the disruption of having to go out of my way. It was right there in my pocket. And, that was good for me. I'm relatively IT savvy. I don't think it takes IT expertise, though. So if you've got a mobile phone, I think it would be fairly good as long as someone supports you with the setting up once it was set up. No problem.
And what about you, Seth? Because you've gone through a transition of being a carer, where you've got to log in, log out, agree your tasks, do the write-up, to using it in a much more efficient way, where you are now having to for risk assessments on care plans, tasks. It's a much more detailed thing. How have you found transitioning into doing that?
I think it definitely helps that I have been out on the road, because I know everybody views things differently, but I could see that the problems that I was having with not necessarily the care plans, because the care plan, it doesn't change, but especially with the client tasks, I could see that a lot of it was very long-winded stuff that wasn't necessarily needed in there. Carers can view everything in the care plans and risk assessments. I think the tasks, so one of my first jobs coming into the office was to condense the tasks down, because you yourself said that you had to go out and do a care call, and the amount you had to read through took up half of your visit time.
It is. So it's a really good point, that, and I would urge any director to do it. Go out and use your app. So every now and then I go out and do the care. I might have been a director for a long time, but I still get my hand in and I go and see the clients and perform their care. And one of the things that's really interesting for me is I went out exactly like Sophie said. Didn't know who the client was, didn't know where the person was, full of my own beans, logged into my app. I'll be able to tell where it all is. Could I tell where it all is? We'd overcomplicated it by putting far too many tasks in. So we had tasks for everything. So when I got back, I gave Sophie the big job of going, everything that's not necessary, get rid of it. Let's stop wasting time. So I don't want to see staff sitting there going tick, 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 answering questions that are irrelevant. Get the important stuff in there and you can write the rest in the document if you need to. So there's something really important there around thinking through what you're exposing your staff and expecting them to achieve in a visit. Because if you overload it, you're taking away the benefit.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I think since you've both then, John and Sophie, been testing how the use of the system is, you've kind of already got good answers to the what's in it for me question that's so important to ask upon implementing new technologies and so on. And we've been speaking a lot of obviously about care planning software now, but are there any other technologies in your roles that we've been talking about today that you use?
I mean, we introduced Slack a little while ago, and there's lots of software like that. But one of the things for domiciliary it did, within the first day, we had messages saying, I now feel part of a team. Because it's really siloed working, isn't it? As a domiciliary carer, you're on your own, it's dark, it's wet, you have no one to rely on, you've got a phone call you can make and that's it. With these sort of softwares, it's great, isn't it? Because they start to help themselves as care teams. I can't find the medication. Well, this morning we had to put it out of the way in the cupboard because John's dementia, he's tackling with it. And they can answer that within the app in a matter of seconds. And what's really good about it is it's not like WhatsApp where you lose the thread. You have closed rooms where you can have medication changes and it doesn't get lost. You can have rooms for seniors to talk. You can have rooms for geographical groups of people to talk. And you can really home it down to get the best use of that technology and support the staff while you're doing it. And, there's so many things in there where in the past we've had clients attend book clubs through using Teams and Zoom and stuff like that. So it feels really basic in the world we live in, but actually, if you think about it, you can use it to really enhance the end user's lives. And it's fascinating, isn't it? When you've got somebody who's elderly and they might have a phone and suddenly their family member in Australia pops up in front of them and they're talking to them face to face. You can't capture that moment and that feeling. You can't. It is just what it is. And we've done that before. We had some people in New Zealand with family and we sat with them for an hour and let them talk about 9 o'clock at night or some ridiculous time because of the time difference. But actually, they hadn't seen them for 15 years. So it's really powerful. And I think, just try and think outside of your immediate issues, because if you have your head down in your immediate issues, you will not ever fix anything. I saw a great image earlier on a slide deck from somebody, and it was some Lego men putting, and you might have seen it, putting a trailer with square wheels, and two little things saying, just stop, I'm too busy. Just stop. And saying, no, I'm too busy. And behind him, someone was holding wheels, going, just stop a minute. Holding these round wheels. And that's the problem we have sometimes. We're too busy to think, I can't look at that for a minute. But if you stop for 10 minutes and you could reevaluate and start fresh, you would definitely start in a way that's going to make it more efficient for you and your team and ultimately provide better care and support to family members like Lee. So I think long-term strategies for your company have to come into consideration. One of the things that I've certainly learned is when you're buying software and you're looking at software, do look at your whole company, look at communication between your staff, look at how you schedule, look at how families interact and clients interact, but also look at what you might want in the future. Because when you're setting up a piece of software, it's a lot of energy. And what we find sometimes is some companies have bolt-ons for auditing, bolt-ons to something else. And if you ever set it up in the right way in the first instance, it doesn't then work later. So you need to speak to a software provider and say, what other products have you got? What other products are you working on? would I be interested in them when they come through? Am I setting up my software right now for that if I need it later? And consider those things before you start.
That's a really, really good point. And obviously, since I'm with Sequoia, and you know that, I'm going to take that straight back to the team.
Help yourself. That's what I'm here.
Things to remember.
Building.
Yeah. But Lee, just one last question for you then. You've obviously, it sounds like, had a really good experience with this. If you were to think a bit ahead, is there anything for you that you'd want for others in a similar situation to yourself going forward?
I mean, obviously, it's very personal, isn't it? And in what works for you, what helps you. My parents and I, we set up Facebook years ago, so we used to Facebook each other all the time. And the step into having care was a big step. I mean, there's no doubt about it. My mum was fiercely independent all of her life, and to accept having some help was really difficult. But I think, because this is all about the app and whether that helped. I think it helped because it involved me, and therefore it gave her confidence. And I suppose my advice would be for people is to try and use the things to enable people to receive the care when they need it, because care can fail really, really easily if people then don't accept it or are reluctant to it. So you need to work with all the tools that are available to you to make it work for you and your loved ones, I suppose. I don't really have any other advice, really. For me, we managed to use it and it worked well. I suspect for some it wouldn't, but I can see exactly how it would work for the business and the company. But for me, it just brought me into that bit of partnership as well, so I felt part of the team too. So that was the important bit for me as a family member. For my mum, it made her feel that I was aware and supporting and helping her in this transition into care. And I guess for the care company, it obviously helped with all of their understanding and all the rest of it. So I think it's about embracing, when you're going through these changes in life, embracing all of the things that go alongside it.
I think there's something in that there as well, isn't there, though, Lee, about if you're not particularly tech savvy, and as a company owner, taking some responsibility to ensure you have enough time with that person to teach them how to use it. And although somebody might have been in New Zealand wanting this part of the family app, we should be able to write guides that are outward facing to those sort of people to let them know how to use it really easily. And I think we use so much tech talk and so many abbreviations in care that you're talking gobbledygook half the time. So let's think about outward facing terminology which works for those who don't understand. And that's a really powerful thing. So if you had somebody, who may be short of sight, if you send them a little bit of text, they're never going to be able to read it. They might have a big tablet which is all blown up. Actually, if you can help them through that, then they're really going to benefit from it. So it's thinking about all of those little things when you're rolling this out. You don't have to do it straight away, but do write it into your preparation plan when you're starting up.
I like those two pieces of advice. They're good. And I think staying open-minded and thinking ahead, like you're saying, and obviously, Sophie, now the two gents have had their chance of recommending and advising the rest of us. What do you say?
I think, touching on what we were talking about earlier, going back to Slack, when I first joined Unicare, I was completely new to the industry. So as much as I knew straight away I was going to love it, it was very overwhelming. And to have, I did single care calls, so I was out on my own, but to have the knowledge that I could pop on Slack and just write, if it was obviously important, I'd ring the office. It was just asking a simple question. I knew within minutes I'd have about 5 different people jumping on, giving me advice. And I think as well, I got to know a few of the other carers who worked on the same round as me, and we would talk every day on this app. I'd never met them before. And then one day I was in the office and I looked at someone, I thought, oh, you look familiar. And it was the person that I'd been speaking to for the past couple of months. And then from then, we kind of met up and you build a friendship as well as a colleague. But without the app, I would have felt so much more alone. And I think the office staff would be inundated with more and more phone calls.
Yeah.
Whereas you pop a question on Slack, anybody can answer it, and it just takes a bit of pressure off the office team as well. If you've got the carers who, to be honest, they know the clients a lot better because they're the ones visiting them daily and they know them inside and out.
I think also, I mean, there's something for you, isn't there, that nobody's off limits on Slack. You know, quite a lot of directors will keep their numbers hidden away from staff. On Slack, it doesn't matter if you're a director or a manager. If Sophie wants to talk to us, she can. She can just put in John Powell and up I'll come, and she can come to me directly. And it's having that open door policy, isn't it, which gives you the reassurance that you can do the job sometimes.
Yeah. And I think especially in dom care, of course, as you said to Sophie, it can be quite lonely. And I'm really happy I asked that last question for you then, because it's Loneliness Week, isn't it, now in the UK? We're having to consider, as you've said, Lee, too, you were brought into your mum's circle of care in a way you perhaps couldn't have been without the technology. And so you're mentioning the whole work environment and feeling part of a team, and tech is an enabler or a prolonger of that community. I'm thrilled that we got the Unicare Devon crew on board today. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Take care.
We'll see you soon. Thanks a lot. Lee, take care. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and share your favorite Take Care podcast with your friends and colleagues. Until we meet next week, take care.